Okay, now that we have our reducer in place and we're able to read our global state in each one of our components when we map the state to props in each component, we want to be able to call functions to be able to update that number and be able to update the global state. And the way that we do that is through actions. So think of reducers as basically just managing the state, whereas the actions is like a function. It's just a plain function that you call just a little bit differently, but just think of it as a function. And you can even see that if we add a new folder called actions, and then in actions we're going to do the same thing, index.js. And then in here we're going to do just a plain function. We're going to do add equals, and then we're going to return an object. So type. So we did type because in the reducer we want to call this increment. So it's looking for the type. So action.type, and we want to pass in this increment. We could just do add, subtract, no fancy words. So at least it matches our function name. So we could pass in add, and we're going to do another function called subtract. Name it subtract. The whole uppercase is just best practice within Redux itself. I don't really have a good reason outside of that. Just do it. And then in order to call these functions, we have to do a similar thing like we did to mapping the state to props. Now we need to map dispatch to props. So dispatch is basically the ability to call this function in this component. So we could actually just create another const, map dispatch to props equals, and you can really name it whatever. You don't have to name it map dispatch to props, but it's another best practice, and you're probably going to use it throughout. It makes it very clear of what it's actually doing, so I would kind of keep it that way. And then one of the things we do need to import is bind action creators from just Redux. And then return bind action creators, and then dispatch. Okay, so in these brackets, you could basically just copy and paste this throughout all of the components because this will stay the same. What changes is what you pass in. So in here, you need to pass in the function or the action that you're going to call. And the first one we did was add. So we need to put it in here, but we also need to import it. Remember, we need to import every single thing we're using. You have to explicitly import what you're using. There's no kind of magic around something being available. Even bind to action creators, none of this will be available unless you explicitly put import in the head of each component. So we're going to import add from our actions. So we're in our screens folder, so we're going to ... out of that folder into actions. And then since it's just called index, you could either do, like I said, index.js or just actions. That'll work as well. And then we also want to do subtract. So we'll just add that. So I will point out that you notice how some things we're importing without the curly brackets and some things we are importing with brackets. And that's because if we go to actions.js, we're exporting two things, export const add. So we're exporting two different functions. And you notice it's not export default. Export default means there's only one thing in that file you can export. So if you did export default on this, you would get an error because there's other things you're trying to export. The only thing you could do export default on is this component, because the only thing you're exporting out of this is the whole component. You may be importing things inside of that component, but the parent React component is what you're exporting, and that's what you're using for all these tabs, for instance. And so now we have everything imported, no errors, yep. So now we should be able to call this.props.add. So just like we did this.props.counter, we could do this.props.add. And let's see. Let's see what we did. This.props is undefined. So, why is it undefined? On press home 30. So these error messages are pretty useful. So you can see the first instance is on press. So it's exactly where we just added that. Let's check it out. This.props.password. Okay, we're passing it in. Blah blah blah. So that reminds me. I think we have to import Thunk middleware. So we have to import some middleware to be able to call these functions in the component. I won't go too much into that because it is a little confusing, but let's see if that's the issue. So we're going to install Redux Thunk. And then we're going to import it.